very intriguing, like this kind of a shower thing down in the basement, and this roof that went up, and anyway, I'll talk about that a little bit. So I lived pretty much my whole life, from about age 6 on till I left for college, in this house, which we knew as the rabbi's house. I also was a paper boy in the neighborhood for 5 years. So there really was very few houses that I wasn't into in the neighborhood, in what was called the Jewish neighborhood at that time. So, and a lot of my friends were Jewish, so I had a lot of good contacts there and a lot of affection for the neighborhood. So I was glad to do that. Now there's a third reason why I want to talk about Rabbi Papermaster, but I'm going to hold that off till the very last part of the program. Okay? But to me, Rabbi Papermaster was a really very outstanding person, and I feel bad that so few people know very much about him. And in fact, the other night, his grandson, David Papermaster, who's a physician and lives out in Connecticut, called. I don't know how he found out about this gathering, but he found out about it, and he called, and he was so appreciative of the fact that his grandfather was being remembered. And he said, and by the way, this is David Papermaster, he had a very wonderful career as a medical researcher, primarily in macular degeneration. But anyway, he was almost emotional in saying how pleased he was that we're gathering. And he said, you know, I have a picture of my grandfather, and I'll show it to you later, a picture of my grandfather that was on my desk for my entire career. And he was always an inspiration to me. So he had quite an effect on a lot of people. Okay, let's talk about, and by the way, usually you do not see a rabbi with the lead reverend, but that is what he preferred. He said, I'm in this country, that's what the other ministers and priests are called, and that's what I'll be called. Several books that I just want to call your attention to very, very quickly. First of all, don't think that I've come up independently with most of this information. Most of it came from a document that was written by Rabbi Papermaster's son, Isidore. And actually, it was written by Rabbi Papermaster in his last 2 years of life. He wrote it out in Yiddish. He never finished it. Eventually, it went to Isidore, who finished it, and then it went to David, via grandson, who was at Harvard at the time, majoring in history. And David kind of finished it up. So that's where it comes from. Okay? And it's the story of his life out here in the Dakotas. Okay? Now, when he wrote that, and when it was published, one of the granddaughters or great-granddaughters or somebody contacted and said, you know, that's very interesting, but he doesn't mention his wife. You know? And we want to know more about what was called the Rebbitzin, the wife of the rabbi, and she played a very, very important role. And so this article was written by B.J. Kremen Goldman, and it's more about her duties, her activities as a woman at that time in the rabbi's house. And then, of course, you need to read Plainbook. I don't know, I don't see him if Father Sherman is here, but Father Sherman is the one who really ought to be writing or giving this talk, because he's the one who did so much of the early work on the history of the Jews in North Dakota. Here's a couple more Jews in small town. There's some stories in there of people who have written stories about growing up in rural America. And I love the title of this one, And Prairie Dogs Weren't Kosher. This is a collection out of Minnesota, but many of the stories are about North Dakota and the Jewish colonies here. Okay, now I'm going to tell you about three of my favorites. Okay, not most, but many of you, I'm sure, have read Rachel Califf's story. In fact, you can get it on TV if you want. There's a musical that's been made of this story. But Rachel Califf came to America, I guess we would say a mail-order bride, so to speak. But she came to America. They homesteaded out at Devil's Lake in the colony out there. And it is, well, if you think your folks had it bad, you've got to read the story of Rachel Califf. Okay? Wonderful story. Dakota Diaspora is about a lady who grew up in the Jewish community north of Bismarck. I'll talk about that a little bit more. And then I'll just wait on this one, but this particular story of Easy Street. In fact, I'll let you see that name, Susan Berman, and see if that's ringing a bell for anybody. We'll come back to that in a few minutes. Okay, I need to explain this, and the rabbi might help me with this, but within Judaism, just like within Christianity, there's all these different groups, okay? You know, they see the world a little bit differently, and so you have rabbinic scholasticism, which is that wonderful yeshiva kind of training where you really study not only the Torah, but the Talmud and the Mishnah, and you know, you really get into that in depth. And that's where Rabbi Papermaster came out of, okay? Then there's the Reform. That was more over in Germany. And that's more the Sigmund Freud, the Albert Einstein. One of the things that they said, they didn't want to be known as German Jews. They wanted to be known as Jewish Germans. Now you think about that. There's a very subtle difference there. Very much wanted to be integrated into the community. Okay? And then there's Hasidism, which the Hasidic movement basically looked at this movement and said, well, yeah, you guys, you got a lot of it right, but you've taken all the joy out of it. You know, there's got to be, you know, being a child of God is fun. You know, there's just a lot of enjoyable things that we can do. And if you saw Fiddler on the Roof, a lot of that would come out of this kind of a background. And then Zionism, which was also another force at the time. Secular Jews who may not have been too excited about the faith, but certainly were concerned about where the Jews were living and the anti-Semitism that went on and so forth. Okay, the reason I bring this out is that when Rabbi Papermaster came to Grand Forks, he was one rabbi to all these influences. It's a little bit like if a pastor were called a hoople, and there was a Pentecostal, there was a high church Anglican, you know what I'm getting at. All these different approaches, and how do you mold them together into a community? And that was part of his job. Okay. We have to go back to Russia for a while because Rabbi Papermaster came from this area up in here, in fact, I think. Up in that area, okay? A lot of the people that migrated into North Dakota who were Jewish came from down in they were from, Rabbi Papermaster was from here, and this was like the Harvard of the yeshivas, okay? And a lot of the people that came into Grand Forks and the colonies were from down closer to the Black Sea, okay? And again, there was different types of experiences that they had. Okay, just go through. Kovno had a large Jewish population. So tragically, during the Second World War with the Holocaust, it was literally wiped out in that area. Okay? It was in the Russian Pale of Settlement. This was called the Pale of Settlement. This is where the Jewish people could live. Okay? And in fact, you had to have a passport to get out of here. Okay? However, even within that, this wonderful academic training went on, and the Slobodka Yeshiva, you correct me on my pronunciations, is right up here, and that's where Rabbi Papermaster went to school. Okay? He was very much influenced by a Rabbi, Isaac Elkanan Spector, and we'll talk about him a little bit later. But he was his mentor. He was his hero, so to speak. And he's the reason why he came to North Dakota. Okay? The rich and varied culture here, important Zionist center, and Rabbi Papermaster attended the Slobodka Yeshiva up here. Okay, I'm just going to show you the passports that were required, just to give you a flavor of what life was like back there to be a Jew. Okay? Occupations of Jews in the Pale. Pale would be just like zone. This was the zone where they could settle. Okay? And these were the kinds of jobs they had. Now I want to point out, farming, 2.4%. Okay, only 2% of the Jews in that area were engaged in farming. Now we're going to find out that when they came to America, everybody thought they could be a farmer. Okay? Yiddishkeit. When you look at Judaism, it's not just a religion, it's a way of life. Okay? It became a way of life over there. And so you have the law, the religious law, and the rabbi plays a big part in that. But you had religious practices, you had food and preparation, and now that's going to take me to my dear friend Ruth here. Ruth is the one who brought some of the goodies here tonight. And Ruth is a recent arrival. They lived out in Virginia, and she and her husband have come to Grand Forks because they happen to have a son here who's a physician, and he has 5 children, and you know grandparents. They want to be. Ruth, would you mind just telling us what these goodies are?
Well, I thought since Ken was giving this wonderful talk, I would try to make a few traditional Jewish desserts so that you get an idea. Unfortunately, I guess you must have been good. This is mango bread, similar to a biscotti, and they're all gone, I think, back there. This one is a little mini cupcake. We make honey cake. This is a very spicy version. And honey cake is given for the New Year. We always eat honey cake. Quite often, if someone's passed away, you'll bring to the house a honey cake or sweets to wish them a sweeter life. This is a macaroon that we eat mostly at Passover because it has no leavening, because during the week of Passover, we put no leavening in our food, with the exception we do use egg whites, but no baking powder or baking soda or yeast or anything like that. So macaroons are made with mostly these coconut, egg whites, and sugar. So those were a couple things I brought. And Rabbi Grossman was very kind in bringing some delicious things from Chicago, from the Jewish bakery there. They're called rugelach, and it's usually a cream cheese dough with any variety of filling you want, and they're